People should never ignore the fact that they owe a debt. That is the worst thing that someone can do. They need to contact an attorney and see what options are available for them. If they just ignore the situation, then their situation will ultimately, it'll get worse. If a person calls me with a bankruptcy question, and for instance, a lot of calls that I get, people ask, what's going to happen with my home? Am I going to lose my home if I file bankruptcy? And I tell them, in the vast majority of cases, people do not lose their home. But that's when I recommend that they set up an appointment with me and have them to come in the office so that I can sit down with them one-on-one, go over their finances in depth, go over their income with them in depth, take a look at exactly who they owe and what type of debts they have, look at what assets they have, and then I can get a better understanding for what their financial position is and tell them what I think will happen. We don't charge a fee for the initial consultation. If someone calls me, I will have them to schedule an appointment to come in and meet with me, and there is no fee for the initial consultation. So if people are experiencing problems, I tell them and encourage them to come in, sit down with me. It won't cost you anything, and let's talk about what options are available for you. In a bankruptcy situation, the process from the first consultation that the client has with me until the bankruptcy is actually concluded, of course it depends on what chapter of bankruptcy a person files. If a person files a Chapter 7, which is also known as straight bankruptcy, that typically takes around 6 to 8 months before it's actually finalized. A Chapter 13, which is also known as debtor's court, can take much longer. It can take up to 5 years or so before it's actually finalized. The bankruptcy law changed several years ago, and it made it a little bit more difficult for people to qualify for a Chapter 7 as opposed to a Chapter 13. So we probably see a larger number of Chapter 13 filings now. A Chapter 7 is considered straight bankruptcy, and when a person files a Chapter 7 case, his case is assigned to a lawyer called a bankruptcy trustee. And the job of that trustee is to come in to see if the client has any assets that can be sold or liquidated to pay off that person's debts, or at least pay a portion of that person's debts. Most people don't have assets that are liquidated or sold. So most people can file a Chapter 7, retain their personal property, retain the mortgage on their house, and discharge the debts that they're having difficulty in paying. The fees for a Chapter 7 are typically paid up front. We do allow clients to set up payment arrangements with us. However, we do require that the fee be paid in full before we can actually file the bankruptcy petition. And the fee amounts vary. It depends on each person's financial situation. A Chapter 13 is set up a little bit differently. We do often require a portion of the fee to be paid up front before we file it, but the large majority of our fee is factored into the payments that the client makes to the bankruptcy trustee each month. So it doesn't cost as much for a person to file a Chapter 13 up front.
Really?
Most people probably end up filing Chapter 13, debtor's court. Certain debts are not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Certain tax debts are not dischargeable. Most debts that are incurred as a result of a divorce decree are not dischargeable. Certain criminal fines and penalties are not dischargeable. But that's one of the reasons that people need to call, set up a time to come in and meet with me, and I can go over what debts may or may not be discharged in the bankruptcy. The vast majority of debts that people incur are dischargeable in bankruptcy. If a person owes a debt and defaults on the payment and ignores telephone calls or collection letters, then that person may ultimately be served with a lawsuit, and If they don't respond to that lawsuit, a judgment by default can be taken in favor of the creditor, and a person's wages can ultimately be garnished, bank accounts can be garnished, property can be levied against and taken to help satisfy the debt.